בוקר טוב. האם אתם רוצים שאני אדבר בעברית או באנגלית? Okay. I'm very pleased to be here again and to speak to you about my experiences, a little bit about the Holocaust, but mostly about the War of Liberation and the siege of Jerusalem during 1947-48. I was asked to speak about the siege of Jerusalem during the war, to do justice of what transpired during those harrowing days. One would need many hours. I will try to highlight the main events which almost brought Jerusalem to surrender during those very difficult days. But before I get to the main subject, I will tell you in short who I am, what I endured to get to this point, so you will better understand the subject. I was born in Czechoslovakia, in a town called Bilka. The town had a population of 10,000. Of them, 2,000 Jews. Only 80 survived. I come from a large family. We were 11 brothers and sisters. I was the youngest. At age 14, like some of you are, I and my family were deported from ghetto Berehovo to Auschwitz, where I was separated from my family. I was sent to 6 concentration camps. We were taken on a death march from Camp Bolkenheim and for 5 weeks, where I was liberated by the American Army. I was very sick and hovered between life and death in an American makeshift hospital. After 2 months, I gained back some of my health. A committee of French Jews came to Buchenwald and decided to take the 500 children and teenagers to France for recuperation for 2 months. We were treated very well. One day, 3 soldiers from the Jewish brigade came to visit us and told us about Eretz Israel, about the Haganah, and the other Jewish underground organizations in Eretz Israel, and asked us, who would like to go to Eretz Israel? 350 of us, including me, signed up to go to Palestine. But they told us that we will be going on Aliyah Bet, the illegal immigration, and that it is very dangerous. At that time, the British were the rulers in Palestine. They published the Sefer Halavan, the white paper, which said that Jews cannot enter Eretz Israel and Jews cannot buy land. The British were anti-Jewish and pro-Arab. 2 weeks later, a convoy with British trucks with Jewish drivers from the Jewish brigade came one night to take us. A freight ship which was waiting for us in a secret port. On that ship there were already some teenagers from other concentration camps. We sailed to Italy, and there they added more survivor teenagers from other camps. they changed the name of the ship to Yaldei Buchenwald, the children of Buchenwald. We ended up 1,100 traveling on the ship for 10 days. On the 10th day, we saw the Carmel Mountains, and the joy was great. Soon after that, 4 British Navy ships surrounded us and announced that you are trying to enter Palestine illegally. Follow us. They took us to Haifa and took us off of the ship, and they took us to the prisoner camp Atlit. We were taken for 6 weeks. One night, in the middle of the night, someone wake us up from our sleep and says, "Get up, get up. We came to free you." This was the Haganah. They overtook the camp, tied up the British guards, cut the barbed wire, and took us out through a hole in the fence. Behind a mountain waited for us trucks. We were distributed in kibbutzim throughout the country. In the morning, when the British discovered what happened, they declared curfew throughout the country for 4 days, but they did not find any of us. Thousands of police and soldiers were searching for us. After 4 days, they gave up, and we were able to go around freely. They gave us false papers. I became a Palestinian. Now, whenever there is an argument between Arabs and me, they say, "I'm a Palestinian." They say, "We were here from the time of the Philistines, and we are the local people, and you were..." So I say, "I'm also Palestinian. Here I have a document which shows it." Soon after that, I joined the Haganah and was sent for 2 months military training in a forest in the Galil, where we learned how to use all kinds of weapons and also military tactics. After that, I settled in Yerushalayim and was a part of the Chativat Etzioni, the Etzioni Brigade, which fought mostly in Yerushalayim and vicinity. While in Yerushalayim, I used to go to the Kotel. At that time, it wasn't simple to reach the Kotel. It was located in a very narrow alley. The Arabs in the old city always hindered the Jews from going to the Kotel. The British were always present near the Kotel, but did not help the Jews. They claimed to be neutral, but were actually on the side of the Arabs. When Yom Kippur came and Jews wanted to blow the shofar after the Neilah service, the British objected and wouldn't allow it because it offended the Arabs. The Beitar organization had a special pluga, a special unit, that every Yom Kippur they tried to blow the shofar at the Kotel. They made sure that someone would sneak in a shofar and blow the required kiyot sounds after Neilah. Many times, the Jews who were caught blowing the shofar were put in prison for many months. My Haganah unit was dispatched to Shchonat Romema in Yerushalayim, which was then a mixed neighborhood, to defend the Jewish inhabitants. On November 29, 1947, when the UN passed the resolution to partition Eretz Israel into two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state, with Jerusalem as the international city, the Arabs declared that they would oppose this decision with armed force and not allow the establishment of a Jewish state. Now, I would like to show you some of the maps. Go back to the first one. Yeah. Here, this is the map of Eretz Israel, the entire Eretz Israel that was promised by the Balfour Declaration. That's what it entailed, all this land, that the Jews will be able to establish there a home, a state for themselves. And then in 1922, Churchill, who was the minister of the colonies, decided on his own to take away the eastern part of the Jordan. Please. See the one on the right, the one with the stripes? That part he took away from the Jewish people and gave it to the Arabs. He brought Sheikh Abdullah from Saudi Arabia, the son of King Faisal, who the family was helping out the British conquering the Middle East, and he crowned him as a king and gave him the eastern part of the Jordan. So it means that Israel was already, once it was already partitioned. And the part that's on the other side of the Jordan, most of them there are Palestinians. So how come that they are now demanding a state again for themselves? The next day, on November 30th, 1947, the first major encounter between Arabs and Jews broke out in Jerusalem. An Arab mob from Jaffa Gate of the Old City streamed into the Jewish commercial center in western Jerusalem on Rehov Mamila, which is now a big mall, and Rehov Shlom Tzion, and other nearby streets. They attacked the Jews and looted the stores at will. On the scene was present armored British cars with British police. They just stood and watched and did not intervene. The Haganah rushed units to the scene to defend the Jews and their property, but were arrested by the British and thrown into jail. At first, the Haganah, the Irgun, the Lehi, and the Palmach forces served mostly in a defense capacity. My Haganah unit was dispatched to Shchonat Romema in Yerushalayim, which was then a mixed neighborhood, as I mentioned, to defend the Jewish inhabitants. Yerushalayim at that time suffered more than any other city in Eretz Israel. The UN, the Christian nations who consider Yerushalayim as the holy city, and other nations stood by while Yerushalayim was starved, bombed, and in danger of being overrun by the Arab mobs. The terrorists and the Arab Legion from Jordan, they all attacked the Jews. Even America stood on the sidelines, looked on, but did not send help. The Arab Legion was under British officers' command. The Jordanians occupied Judea and Samaria, which some call the West Bank, and the Old City in Jerusalem. The Jordanians established positions on the hills around Jerusalem, and from there they shelled Jerusalem with heavy artillery day and night. No one in the world cared that the holy city of Jerusalem is being destroyed, and that at that time only 100,000 Jews lived in Western Jerusalem. The Arabs, with the help of the British, attempted for months to drown Jerusalem in Jewish blood. The city was completely surrounded by Arab hostile villages. Jerusalem was under siege for months. The one and only road which existed then from Jerusalem to the coastline was cut off by Arab armed forces. A number of times, convoys with food, medicine, and other necessities tried to break through the blockade. Most of these convoys were attacked by the Arabs. The trucks were burned, and the drivers with their escorts were killed. Today, on the road to Jerusalem, at SAR Haganah, you may notice burned-out vehicles on the sides of the road as a reminder of those difficult days. The Arab aim was to starve the Jewish inhabitants in Jerusalem and create panic so it will be easier to conquer the city. Water, food, electricity, petroleum for cooking, medical supplies, and other basic necessities were rationed. Many Jewish houses were demolished, and many civilians were killed and wounded by snipers and artillery shells. Just by walking today through the streets of Katamon, the neighborhood in Jerusalem, one can learn a great historic lesson about the siege of Jerusalem from the names of the streets, which tell the story, such as Rehov HaShayarot, the street of the convoys, or Rehov Machalkei Hamayim, the street where they were giving out water. You see, water was very precious in Jerusalem, and the leadership of the city, when it was raining, they had the water collected in wells, and they locked the wells so people would not be able to take just like that. And then they filled up tankers from these wells, and they went around in the streets, and they were rationing and giving out a container of water to the public for drinking or cooking and so on. They have a name like Rehov Palmach, Rehov Achim, which means Chel, and also Rehov Achish, and Rehov Mishmar Ha'am, and Rehov Alamet Hei, which I'll talk in a little while about it, and many others. So if you want a real lesson, just go through the Shechona of Katamon. During the months of November 1947 and May 1948, the Jews in Eretz Israel suffered a number of grave defeats, especially Jerusalem had a great share of it. Har HaZofim, Mount Scopus, was cut off from western Jerusalem. What happened was the Arab Legion conquered some areas there, and the Jews could not go through to the Hadassah Hospital or the Hebrew University. The British made an agreement with the Jews and the Arabs that once in 2 weeks, a convoy escorted by the British will go to Har HaZofim and bring doctors and nurses and also supplies for the people that are there. A Jewish convoy with medical personnel left West Jerusalem in Magen David Adom vehicles for Hadassah and the Hebrew University. 200 yards from a British military outpost, which supposedly guarded the road to Har HaTzafim, which was in the Arab section called Sheikh Jarrah, or the Hebrew name for it is Shimon HaTzadik. The Arabs ambushed the convoy in broad daylight. When the firing stopped, 77 unarmed Jews, mainly professors, doctors, and nurses, had been slaughtered. Another defeat was the fall of the Jewish quarter in the old city of Yerushalayim. Century after century, under the gravest duress and persecution, the Jewish in the Jewish quarter of the old city clung to the remaining wall of the destroyed Beit HaMikdash. At the siege of Yerushalayim, only 1,600 Jews lived in the old city and the Jewish quarter, mostly deeply religious Jews. They were surrounded by 30,000 extremely hostile Arabs. Despite Jewish pleas to the British to guard the Jewish enclave, they contended that the Arabs will not attack unarmed and harmless people. The British wanted the Jews to leave so they will be able to hand it over to the Arabs. The Haganah realized that the Jews in the old city are in great danger. They organized inside the quarter fortified lookout posts for the few defenders that volunteered for the task. The Jewish Defense Force in the enclave consisted of about 100 men who were capable of bearing arms. In spite of the great odds, they continued their brave defense against thousands of armed Arabs. They suffered heavy casualties. Then came the final onslaught by the Jordanian Arab Legion. On May 28, 1948, after a siege of 6 months, the defenders laid down their meager arms. The Red Cross supervised the surrender with certain terms. 1,300 elderly Jews, women and children were allowed into the west of Jerusalem. 340 were taken as prisoners of war, and teenage boys among them. The Arab commander saw the Jews they fought against and all these months, and the handful of arms that they had angrily announced. This commander actually was a British guy who converted to Islam, and he changed his name to Glob Pasha. And because when he saw the people that were in the old city and the meager arms that they had, it made him very angry, and he stated the following: "What? These are the men against we fought He was very angry because his army was so superior and they had to fight for 6 months until they were able to subdue these elderly Jews. The entire world at that time was against Israel to establish a state. The UN declared an embargo against weapons. Many nations kept it, including the US. The only country which sold important arms to Israel was Czechoslovakia. The heavy machine guns, which I learned how to operate, saved the situation. Their rifles, their ammunition, some tanks, and other equipment changed the direction of the war. Up until now, the Arabs won the following strategic places: the Old City, Gush Etzion, which I'll talk in a minute about, the Hadassah Enclave, the water pipeline to Jerusalem, and the Lamed Hay, an entire platoon of 35 excellent fighters on the way to Gush Etzion. Gush Etzion were 4 kibbutzim not far from Hebron. It was the thinking was that if there are going to be a few Jewish villages on the outskirts of Jerusalem, they will hold back the Arabs from conquering Jerusalem. So they were very much in danger. And they evacuated the children and the women from these kibbutzim to Jerusalem. Only the men remained. However, they needed reinforcement. So 1 platoon of the Haganah, 35, they were students at the Hebrew University, the cream of the crop of Jerusalem. They decided one night to try to reach Gush Etzion in order to reinforce the people that have been living there. And so they left in the evening, and they thought that by daybreak they will just make it to Gush Etzion. And they marched all night with equipment and everything they were able to take with them. And in the morning, when there was daylight, they saw an Arab, an old Arab, with he was a shepherd with a flock of sheep. And a debate started among the Haganah members what to do with this old man, whether to let him go or to kill him. And sure enough, the Jewish morality told them that he is an old man, an innocent person, they have to let him go. So they let him go, but that was their biggest mistake, because soon after that, he alerted the Arabs in the villages around there, and thousands of them were flocking to the place where the 35 Haganah members were marching towards Gush Etzion. Every one of them was massacred. They fought until the last bullet. And not only that, some of the Arabs told later on that they were even throwing stones. They were fighting with stones, but not one survived. So it's called the Lamed Hay, the 35 who sacrificed themselves to help out Gush Etzion. After the 6-day war, when the area was conquered again, they established a kibbutz on that spot, and it's called Kibbutz Lamed Hay. And also, in many places in Israel, in Jerusalem and other places, there are streets named after them. Rehov Lamed Hay there is one in Jerusalem, and so on. As far as Gush Etzion, the Arab Legion attacked the Gush, and the battle went on for an entire week. All the people there were killed except 150 that were taken prisoners and were taken to Jordan to a prisoner camp where they stayed over a year, and then they were exchanged and freed. The biggest problem the Arabs had was their disunity. Each country of the 7 invading Arab states wanted to grab territories for themselves. They did not want to help the Arabs who lived in Eretz Israel. Egypt wanted the Negev and a foothold in Jerusalem. Jordan wanted the West Bank and Jerusalem. Syria wanted the Galilee. Iraq wanted parts of the Emek Yisrael, the Jezreel Valley, and so on. Most of them wanted a share in Jerusalem. At first, the aim of the Haganah was to try to defend the Jewish neighborhoods and settlements. After a few painful defeats, the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi changed their aim. They started to attack and take over territory and hold on to it. That's when the Arabs' exodus began. The Arabs retreated. We took more territory. This was a wise plan. Our unit, which was a part of the Etzion Brigade, participated in a number of battles in Jerusalem area. We were very active, especially at night, because at that time the Arabs were not trained in night combat, but we were. We conquered the Arab neighborhoods of Sheikh Badr, which today the Knesset stands on, Malcha, Miskeri, and Ashafra, which is now Har Herzl. After these successes, our platoon was dispatched to Kibbutz Ramat Rachel, which was then the most southern outpost of Jerusalem. The women and children from the kibbutz were evacuated. Only the men stayed to take care of the livestock. We were sent as reinforcement. On Friday, Hey Iyar Tafshin Chet, May 14, 1948, just a few hours before Shabbat began, the British mandate on Palestine was to expire. Our platoon was ready in positions around the kibbutz. We listened to the Haganah radio station when it was announced that the leaders of the Yishuv, of the Jewish community in Eretz Israel, gathered in the assembly hall of the Tel Aviv Museum. In a joyous voice, David Ben-Gurion read the Megillat HaAtzmaut, the Declaration of Independence. We in the trenches of the kibbutz held our breath at this historic moment, a moment that the Jewish people dreamt of for thousands of years. This declaration would never have happened were it not for years of yearning, praying, hard labor, pioneering, and creativity, which led to the making of a desolate country once again into a flourishing land. Immediately after midnight that Friday, which was already May 15, 1948, the Arabs openly declared war against the newborn Jewish state. 7 Arab armies invaded Israel. We in Ramat Rachel received word that the Egyptian brigade was advancing from the Negev, the south, on to Hebron Beit Lechem highway, and their destination was Jerusalem to enter from the south. But Kibbutz Ramat Rachel was in their way. Although we were only a platoon of 38 soldiers plus 24 members of the kibbutz who were combat ready, we did not panic. Even though the Egyptian brigade of 700 soldiers was heavily armed with tanks, artillery, mortars, and heavy machine guns, we were no match because we had only very few outdated weapons, but we had a secret weapon called General Ein Breira, which meant we had no choice but to fight. We had a unique spirit. We knew that this was our task to defend, to prevent the Egyptians from entering Yerushalayim at all costs, even to give our lives. We knew that this was the last place we Jews had. If Chas v'Chalila we lost, there would be no future for the Jewish people. The next morning, the Egyptian brigade appeared on the horizon. We were told not to open fire until they reach our trenches because we wanted to surprise them and also to save ammunition. We inflicted heavy losses on them and they retreated. The battle for Ramat Rachel lasted an entire week. We had a few casualties and wounded. The kibbutz changed hands a few times. The livestock, the chickens, the animals were killed from the shelling. Because of the overpowering might the Egyptians had, we tactically retreated to Arnona, a nearby section of Jerusalem, regrouped, and at night recaptured the kibbutz. At the end, Kibbutz Ramat Rachel remained in Jewish hands. Those who visited Ramat Rachel probably noticed the old dining room structure full of shrapnels and bullet holes. It is always the Jewish ingenuity that saves our people. The Haganah command secretly constructed a road to Jerusalem called the Burma Road, which broke the siege. It's called the Burma Road because in the Second World War, the British were looking to go from Burma to China to bring reinforcements, but they didn't have a road to go. So they built this secret road, and therefore it was called the Burma Road, and Israel named it after that. Okay. During the War of Liberation, 6,000 casualties. Israel had 6,000 casualties. Of them were 1,500 Holocaust survivors. Imagine, it's a high percentage, both. 6,000 casualties out of 600,000 Jews that lived then in Israel, and of them were 1,500 Holocaust survivors. Some of them were the only survivors of their families. After many battles and losses, an armistice was signed with the Arab countries. For 19 years, the Jordanians occupied Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem. Even though in the Armistice Agreement, Jordan agreed that the Jews will be able to go to the Kotel, but they never allowed it. The War of Liberation saved West Jerusalem from being overrun by the Arabs, and the Six-Day War liberated East Jerusalem, including the Kotel and the Har HaBayit. In conclusion, I would like to say the Arabs claim that Jerusalem belongs to them, but the irony is that in the Quran, their Bible, Yerushalayim is not mentioned even once, but in our Bible, in the Tanakh, the word Yerushalayim and Zion appears 821 times. This proves the centrality of Yerushalayim in the Jewish faith and the consciousness. The great nace, the miracle of the Six-Day War of June 1967, the liberation of Judea and Samaria and the rest of Eretz Israel, including the old city of Yerushalayim, with the Kotel and the Har HaBayit, was a great ancient achievement for the Jewish people. This miracle brought new life to Yerushalayim, to Medinat Yisrael and the Jewish people. When Tzahal entered the old city, they discovered that during the 19 years of the Jordanian occupation, they made deliberate attempts to destroy and erase the memory of the Jewish past. Yeshivot, Batei Knesset, Batei Midrash were all defiled and destroyed. The Matzevot and Har HaZeitim on the cemetery of Mount of Olives, the ancient cemetery, were destroyed and used to pave roads in the Jordanian army base. Kaf Chet Iyar, the 28th of Iyar, is the date of Yerushalayim liberation. This is the date when the city was reunited, as the psalmist recited, Yerushalayim habnuya, ki ir shechubra la yachdav. I want you to remember 4 words in Hebrew, which will give you always, you will think of Yerushalayim, of what happened during the period of the Holocaust and all that. I call my children and my grandchildren, I call them Yaldei Hanisim, the miracle children. But I also say that they are my nechama, my comfort, and my nikama, and my revenge. And the other thing the other 2 words that I wanted you to remember is Shoah and Tkuma. There was this terrible Holocaust, but then came the Tkuma, the revival. The Jewish people were able to revive themselves and establish their own country, and look what they did in just 70 years. I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you very much. I feel like a really put color on what we've been talking about. I hope you feel like really connected to what we've been talking about in class. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. How does the Tanakh shape your relationship to the state of Israel?
I feel that the Tanakh is the one that connects all these. It's interesting that at the time of the British, they had a commission that was looking to divide Palestine. It was called the Peel Commission. And they invited leaders of the Arabs and leaders of the Jews to tell them why the British should think that it belongs to them. So Ben Gurion said, a simple thing, look in Tanakh. If you look in Tanakh, you will find what it says there. God promised the land to the Jewish people. And also, look, we had two kingdoms. Over 1,000 years, the Jews were living in Palestine. They had their own country, the Beit HaMikdash, and everything. So the Tanakh is the stamp of approval that it belongs to the Jewish people. And nobody can erase that because the Christians believe in that. The entire cultured world knows what is written there. So it's a very important document for the Jewish people.
And you'll see some books out there. If he's an expert.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to add one more thing. When I was in the concentration camps, people were dying all the time. And we were talking amongst ourselves and saying, you know, we'll all die here and nobody will know even what happened. If with God's grace, someone will survive, please tell the world what happened. I made a neder, a vow, that if I survive, I'm going to speak about it, I'm going to write about it, and that's what I did. I am speaking and I wrote about it. There are books out there. I want you to look at them because you cannot tell everything. You need 1,000 years to tell all the stories.
You have a question? Yeah.
How did your experiences in the Shoah affect your willingness to sacrifice your life for the state of Israel?
How did your experience in the Shoah affect your willingness to sacrifice for Israel?
Well, I felt that I have nothing to, at that time I didn't know if anybody survived in my family. I didn't know, I felt that I have nothing to lose, that the Jewish people have to go on living. And that's the only way we have to fight, even if we have to give our lives.
Did you know, you said that when the members of Haganah came to France, that's when you heard, had you been a Zionist before? Did you know about the efforts to settle the land?
In my hometown, in Bilka, in Czechoslovakia, from 10 years on, I was in Bnei Akiva for 4 years, from 10 to 14. And there I learned about Zionism, and also, if I look in the Chumash, I learned Rashi and I learned Chumash. Those that know the Chumash, if you open up Bereshit, the first pasuk in Rashi tells, he says, why does the Torah start with Bereshit bara Hashem et hashmayim v'et haaretz? Why doesn't it start with the months and so on? So Rashi says that there will come a time when the nations will say to the Jews, Listimatem, you are robbers, you took away the land from us. So God says, the land belongs to me. I give it to whomever I want. I gave it to the 7 nations. Now I'm taking it away and giving it to the Jewish people.
Elliot, a question?
Given all the bad things that happened to you, and all like the hardships of your religion, how do you manage to stay proud of you?
Given the suffering of the Holocaust, how did you maintain your faith and connection to Judaism?
I have an entire book about that. It's called Hope, Faith, and Resilience, what the Germans could not take from us. They took everything, but these things they couldn't take. So, but to tell you in short, I was brought up in a religious home to believe in God Almighty, and also that they will come, the Jewish people will be redeemed. And I knew Jewish history. I knew a lot of Tanakh already when I was a young boy. And all this gave me courage. I wouldn't say that all the time. There were times I felt this is the end. And I want you to know that there were times that I felt, that's it, I'm giving up. And it's interesting to point out that religious people had a better chance to survive than non-religious. And that's very simple because the religious person had something to hold on to. I don't know if you heard of Primo Levi, an Italian Jew who was an assimilated Jew and a scientist. He was taken to Auschwitz when he was 26 years old. He was brought to Auschwitz and he says to himself, what am I doing here? I'm Italian. And then he sees in the corner in a barrack, a group of Jews are standing and praying. So he envied them because he knew that they have something to hold on to. And he says it. He said, I became a Jew in Auschwitz. He became more believing than before. So, and one other thing, there is a saying in Yiddish. I'll say it first in Yiddish and then I'll translate it. Ein Mensch ist starker von Eisen und schwacher von a Flieg, which means a human being is stronger than iron, but weaker than a fly. Now, I had this strong will to survive. I said, one of us must survive of my family. And however, there were times that I felt as weak as a fly because we were hungry, we had nothing, we were sick, we worked hard. So that's what it was.
One more question? We have time for one more? Yeah.
After all of your sacrifice and dedication to the land of Israel, how did you decide to move from America?
It's a long story. I discovered that some of my family survived. They didn't know that I survived, and I didn't know that they survived. So they asked me to come here to study. And I went to Yeshiva University where I did all my degrees and I studied. And then I met my wife here, and that's how it is. Although I go to Israel every year for a few months, and I have a daughter living there with 4 grandchildren, and they all 4 served in the Israeli army. And day and night I am listening to what's going on and trying to help whatever I can from here.
So much.